if you have all of your devices syncing, and then you get a malware infection on your device, and that corrupts your local copy of the file, and then that syncs and replicates to all of your other devices, well, now you're in trouble because bad data can overwrite good. And if you delete data off your device, it can also delete it from your cloud. And so all of these automations are great when you're collaborating, but it's not good when you need to preserve the integrity of data as of a specific point in time, especially, for our attorney friends.
You're listening to the Legal Mastermind Podcast with your hosts, Ryan Klein and Chase Williams, the go-to podcast for learning from the experts in the legal community about effective ways to grow and manage your law firm.
Today on the Legal Mastermind Podcast, we have Cathy Miron. She's the CEO of eSilo. And many of our listeners right now are going to really benefit from this conversation because she is the expert on some issues where your company might actually be exposed right now due to some security flaws. So welcome to the Legal Mastermind Podcast, Cathy.
Thanks for having me.
I know you have a very impressive background working at GE and some other large companies. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit more about how you got started and what you currently do?
Sure. So I started my career at GE, as you mentioned. I spent 14 years there, moving around in all different areas of the business, always with one foot in IT, but the other foot in compliance, operations, finance, and all of the different subsidiaries. So healthcare, aviation, financial services. And I was lucky enough to spend 9 of those years as an IT auditor. So going around and assessing the security and the compliance and the resiliency of our businesses. So I had a chance to see great IT, not so great IT, new acquisitions, new upcoming divestitures, and everything in between. And so that perspective gave me a really good foundation for what I do now at eSilo, where we take those best practices, tools, and methodologies and scale them down for small businesses to help them avoid a lot of the same mistakes that we see across.
Awesome. So speaking about mistakes, I think really just starting off, I thought something that was really interesting. You're down in South Florida, and during our pre-interview, you mentioned Broward County School just got held ransom for $40 million. So that was obviously a security flaw somewhere within their system that was compromised. Can you let our listeners know, I guess starting off, what are some common flaws that you see specifically in the legal industry?
Absolutely. So the Broward County School example is a developing situation. So more details will certainly come over the next couple of days as they investigate that further. But within the legal industry, we see a lot of common issues related to emails and passwords. So it's kind of basic blocking and tackling. And security in general is equal parts prevention and detection and response. So on the prevention side of things, if you have good policies for how you secure your client's data, how you manage access to your systems, how you ensure that your staff aren't clicking on suspicious links in emails or falling victim to social engineering attacks in email or on the phone, then you're going to be in a pretty good spot to prevent a lot of these attacks. But by far, year after year, phishing and variations of phishing through text messages, even snail mail, voicemail are still the number one way that malware gets into an environment and begins to take hold of your systems and devices.
It's getting pretty crazy. I've gotten emails from people I know, and then you kind of look into it and hover over the actual email address, and you're like, whoa, this isn't the right email address. And it's like asking for money or a really specific question geared towards me.
Yeah. So that would be considered a phishing attack, or in some cases, a spear phishing attack. So a very, very well-crafted, well-researched and targeted campaign directed exactly towards you. So they might be following you on social media and see that you are a volunteer with a certain organization or just spoke at an event. And they'll reach out to you and say, hey, Chase, I saw you at, blah, blah, blah. Really liked your presentation on this. Here's an article I wrote about the topic, and they'll give you a link to click on. And so, as you said, one of the best ways to take a look at where you're going is to hover over the link, but know that that's not foolproof, because even if you hover over the link and it looks like it's going to, this legitimate website, when you get to that website, there can be another redirect where they're then sending you to a infected website where they're going to steal your credentials or ask you to log into something or ask you for payment information. So there's a lot of different ways that you can protect your email. And one of the best ways is to make sure that your IT provider has good spam filters in place so that they're going to both block malicious attachments before they come to you, and they're going to scan for anything that looks suspicious, but it also put a banner at the top of the email warning you that this is coming from outside of your organization. Be really careful, make sure that you trust it. And if you're ever in doubt, pick up the phone and call.
And so if somebody accidentally clicks on a link and realizes like, oh man, this is not the person or email I thought it was, are there any precautions that could happen even though they didn't type in any information?
Yeah. So in some cases, you can embed malware in images, or there can be automatic download. So as soon as you hit the link, it'll begin downloading something. So if you get to a website or click on a link or open an attachment and you think something doesn't feel right, I would immediately leave. Definitely don't put in any information. If it's downloaded, any attachments, do not run them. If it gives you a pop-up that asks for permission to run something, don't give it. And then I would call your IT provider.
Did Chase mention in the pre-interview that he did a lunch and learn on cybersecurity? And
No, he didn't. Were you teaching or attending?
So it's like I'm getting like a little deja vu, but it's all great stuff. So Chase is just to preface is near to his heart is cybersecurity and all this stuff, and I'm also really looking at technologies that are able to create that layer of security. So to maybe segue into that, when you start speaking, in a consultation with the business, and they're like, "Oh no, we got it covered. We use X, Y, or Z." Are there things that you just kind of hear it and you start cringing, like, "No, you're really not secure if you're using these things"?
Yeah, so it happens all the time. And our core business at eSilo is data backup. So I often have a backup related conversation with a prospect. And I cringe when they tell me everything's already backed up because it's in the cloud. Whether that cloud is their software as a service provider, or it's just Google Drive or OneDrive or Dropbox or something else, I always let them know a couple of things. One is that all the cloud really means is that your data is sitting on someone else's infrastructure in someone else's data center. There's still a physical manifestation of your data someplace and someone who's responsible to protect it. So choosing your cloud provider and the experts that you work with is critically important. The second piece is that if you read the terms of service for most of these cloud services, what they'll tell you is that we back up data for our own purposes. So if our data center experiences an issue, we can move all of our systems and your data to a new facility and spin that up really quickly. But in the fine print, it says you're still responsible for the content you create and put into that platform. So at the end of the day, you're responsible for the integrity of that data. If any of it gets corrupted, they're not going to recover it for you. And it's important to have your own set of backups that you can control independent of that vendor. So if they're ever experiencing an issue, you have your own way to get a hold of that data and to continue to execute on your own disaster recovery plan. And I think a very important example of this is a bit of a black swan event where I think it was a month or two ago, one of the largest cloud hosting providers in Europe, it's a company called OVH. They host millions of websites for a whole bunch of companies around the world. They experienced a catastrophic fire where their 5-story data center burned to the ground. So despite redundant fire and all kinds of other protective systems, they had a catastrophic loss. All of the servers, all of the data in one of the buildings and a portion of a connected building were completely. And so you see the CEO out on Twitter being very proactive in informing people of the situation as it was unfolding. And you see all these responses of people saying, well, my data is on this server in this rack. Is it okay? Can you help me get to my backup? And you have to realize that in a situation like that, everyone at that company is all hands on deck to restore services and just contain the damage. Nobody's able to help you with getting your backup, coming up with a plan B. And so that's why even if you're putting your data in the cloud, you have to have your own resiliency. And then I guess the last thing I would say about when folks tell me, hey, my data is in the cloud, I don't have to worry about it, is that there's this confusion sometimes that cloud sync and cloud backup are the same thing, and they're not. And so we think of cloud sync, or I think of cloud sync as tools like Dropbox and OneDrive and Google Drive, where you can have a copy of that file or document on your device. It syncs to the cloud, it syncs to your mobile, you can get to it from anywhere. It makes version control really easy. It makes collaboration with colleagues or third parties really easy, but it's not a backup tool in the sense that, yes, a copy lives someplace else. So I guess it kind of fulfills, the very simplistic definition of backup, but you don't control retention. The provider is ultimately the one who decides how much retention history they're going to, whether that's 10 versions or 30 days worth or some other value. If you've ever actually tried to Google how many versions will Google Drive store for you, I spent a half an hour doing it and never got a clear answer. And the reason is they don't want to tell you because it's not a service where they're guaranteeing a certain amount of retention or history, they want the freedom to flex that as necessary to manage their cost profile. And so the other thing is, if you have all of your devices syncing, and then you get a malware infection on your device, and that corrupts your local copy of a file, and then that syncs and replicates to all of your other devices, well, now you're in trouble because bad data can overwrite good. And if you delete data off your device, it can also delete it from your cloud. And so all of these automations are great when you're collaborating, but it's not good when you need to preserve the integrity of data as of a specific point in time. And especially, for our attorney friends, that chain of custody, that level of version history is incredibly important.
So up to this point, we've talked about a lot of things that can go wrong with data. So like we were talking about before, law firms, they tend to be like, I don't have this problem because I have a server in-house, I have my IT guy. It's just all self-contained. So why should I do all these things where it seems like there are a lot of ways that it can, compromise their data? So I guess what are the steps to really acknowledging that there is that option and putting, those options in a light where maybe they're worth pursuing?
Yeah. So I think that especially now we're at this great kind of precipice where there are so many digital tools available and so many ways that you can really modernize your systems and your information and modernize your practice. So a couple of things that I would say is, if you just want to have your server room and do things the way that you've always done, there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but you have to make sure that the people that are managing your environment for you are really skilled at cybersecurity. The threats are changing every day. And a lot of the IT consulting companies that I've worked with, and through no fault of their own, but they have a lot of generalists because they're being asked to serve lots of different businesses with lots of different software, different hardware. They're setting up networks, they're answering end user questions and everything in between. And so the level of time and attention they're able to spend on securing your environment and making sure that not only the infrastructure is running well, but that all of the users in the organization are trained, right? That human firewall is almost just as important as all the technical pieces that run behind it. So what I would say is that, for any firm looking to really step up their security and make sure that they feel confident that they can say that their data is truly protected and they can assure their clients that, you need to focus on about half prevention and half detection and response. So that's kind of that 50-50 equation where you can spend boatloads of money and dedicate a lot of resources to trying to prevent every single cyber attack. But the reality is that hackers only need to be lucky once. You need to be lucky every single time. And inevitably, someone's going to make a mistake, click on the wrong thing, and you have to have a plan in place for how you're going to respond to that quickly so that operations can continue running and you can contain the incident. So on the detection and recovery side, that's where the backups come, right? Solid set of backups where you know that you can, in a matter of minutes, recover an exact system image exactly as it was, operating system, applications, databases, settings, data, and all, right? That's going to be your get out of jail free card when you get hit with ransomware. And it can't protect you from the scenario where, a hacker says, hey, I've got access to all of your data. I'm going to release it to the public, right? That's where the prevention side of it comes from. But at least you know that if you have a good set of backups, you're going to minimize your downtime and it's not going to cost you as much in terms of loss. So on the prevention side, I think it comes down to a couple of things. One, security awareness training for your people. You have to do it. Do it every year. And if you can, do it more often than that. There's a lot of great video training platforms. We even offer some free videos through eSilo where you can put little micro trainings, short 2-minute videos in front of folks each week, each month, just to keep security top of mind. And then secondly, having a clear policy where you're explaining not only what the requirements are for the firm and how you expect your staff, your third parties and partners to be protecting your information, but then, of course, using that as the foundation for your training, I think is another component. And then thirdly, strong access controls and passwords. And we can talk a little bit more about that if you want. But I think those are the things that as a practice owner, as a partner, you all can control. And then the rest of it, you have to put in the hands of your IT folks, right? So whomever you've hired to look after your systems, making sure they're securing the devices and the network.
So on the software side of things, what are some things that you recommend for managing passwords and also a general, like almost like firewall or antivirus. And I specifically am asking for a Mac because I remember back in the day, it's like, oh, Macs can't get viruses. And that's I know from personal experience, it's very untrue.
So you're probably the fourth person who's asked about Mac already this week, which is just crazy. And somebody said the same thing. I was told that as a Mac user, I don't need antivirus. Like Mac's just inherently secure. And I think it's a bit of a fallacy just because there's so much news about Microsoft and Windows. And it makes sense, right? If you were a bad guy and you wanted to create bad software to steal money from a bunch of people, who would you rather build it for? 99% of the population or maybe the 1%? I think the 1% is actually growing these days. And so let's start with the password piece first, because I think that's universal. A password manager is one of the single best things that you can do to protect the security of your passwords. And so I use LastPass. I always recommend that to my clients, but there's other ones, Dashlane, OnePass. There's a whole slew of them out there. But either way, the message should be go get one and store your passwords in a password manager and not in your browser. And definitely not in a file on
Chrome.
Not in Chrome, but not in an Excel file, a Word document, a book on your desk. I mean, I've seen it all.
These passwords?
Yes, like that. Don't do that.
Write them on a sheet of paper. That's not that bad, but they get like swept up and thrown in the trash. Yeah.
And then people are like, well, when I travel, I put the paper in my briefcase and I take it with me on the plane. And so, okay, that's, a recipe for a different problem.
You can laminate it, but yeah, I hear it.
And then the other thing I would say too, as far as software, is use an authenticator app. So if you don't know what that is, Google makes one, Microsoft, LastPass has one built in. But the whole idea is that multi-factor authentication, or using multiple factors to verify your identity when you log into a website, is the best way to prevent account takeover, identity theft, a lot of the things that lead to the malware infections and the phishing attacks. And so if you're using multi-factor authentication, you're usually giving a combination of something which is your password, and something you have, which is a rotating 6-digit code. And so you can use SMS authentication where they'll text you a code. It's better than not using anything, but it's also not as good as using a true authenticator app. That's just because SMSs are sent unencrypted, and you can have those messages be hijacked on their way to you. And there's even been some really public attacks on T-Mobile and other mobile providers where they will essentially call customer service pretending to be you and get them to switch your SIM card to or your phone number to a different SIM card. And so once they've done that, they're getting all of your 6-digit codes. And then with your account credentials, they can log in as you. So multi-factor authentication is the single best thing that you can do to protect your account. Stats from Microsoft say that it's effective at preventing 99.99% of automated attacks. So get a password manager, use an authenticator app for your multi-factor authentication, and you'll be in at least pretty decent shape.
I have a very specific question. How often should you change a password on a website?
So there's different schools of thought on this. One is really long, complicated passwords and change them often. The problem with that is then if you don't have a password manager, they get really hard to remember. So then you start writing them down and doing things like that. I would recommend once a year is probably a good idea. Once every 6 months if you really wanted to be aggressive with it. But if you use a password manager, you can change it once a month. I mean, it's literally as easy as clicking a couple of buttons and it'll switch it for you. And then there's nothing that you have to worry about. And the new password automatically gets saved. And the other thing I'll say about a password manager is if you have an assistant or a VA or someone else who handles your correspondence or anything else like that, you can share a password with them from your password manager without them ever seeing the password. So that way they can manage your personal affairs without knowing, the password that you use for a couple of sites. You shouldn't reuse them across sites, but we're human and we do it. So,
how much more complicated has remote work made everything from accessing information from like servers or internally to individuals working from home successfully and continuously backing up their work? Like, has it just been exponential?
Yes and no. I think if we had this pandemic 5 years ago or even 3 years ago, it would have been much more challenging for business to continue. I think today with so many mobile tools and SaaS-based solutions, remote work is easier than ever. But it's not to say that it's not without its own challenges. And so for law firms that have physical servers behind a corporate network and everyone's used to being in the office, that was certainly an adjustment, right? To set up remote access, do it in a secure way using a VPN or a virtual private network. I think that was a big speed bump for many businesses, but I think at this point now we're almost a year into it or more than a year into it. I think they've found their groove. The challenge that we're seeing now is that we had this rush to remote work and all of these, employees working from home, sometimes on company devices, sometimes not, and also sharing their home network with teenagers, spouses, other people that maybe have had little to no security training or awareness. And because our homes are all filled with smart devices, right? So a camera-enabled doorbell, a voice assistant, smart thermostat, smart refrigerator, all of these devices are connected to the internet, but there's no equivalent of antivirus that you can install on them. So as a consumer, there's no way to make them secure. The only way that they're secure is that they're shipped that way from the manufacturer, and you have to periodically update the firmware on those devices, which, when was the last time you updated the firmware on your refrigerator? Probably never. So when you have a situation like this, you have to consider the fact that the home network is maybe no longer secure. And I don't know if anyone's ever logged into their home router to change the default password, to check the security settings, but it's really shocking what you find when you do that. And so, quick story, we are in a Comcast service area. They broadcast Xfinity Wi-Fi. Well, if you're a Comcast customer, your home router is broadcasting Xfinity Wi-Fi to all of your neighbors. And anybody driving by on the street can connect to your Xfinity Wi-Fi. So it's siphoning off your bandwidth, and it's a bad security practice. And so instead of trying to make everybody a techie so they can figure out how to go do all of this themselves, or hiring an expensive consultant to come to their home and do that for them, there's a very simple device. It's called a smart firewall. I have one here on my desk. And you just plug it into whatever your modem is or wherever you get your internet connection. And the way to think about it, it's very much like the firewalls that you would have at the office set up by an IT person. But these are very simple plug and play. They're cloud enabled. So they're constantly updated with the latest security updates. And it's the equivalent of having a security guard standing at the front door of your house, checking IDs of everyone coming in and going out and making sure that all that traffic is legitimate. So those are really easy ways that you can add a layer of security to your home network, but a lot of people aren't aware of them and so haven't done it yet. That's where we're trying to get out and get some education out there, that there are these really simple remote work kits that can exponentially improve your security posture no matter where you are.
Because you mentioned something about like the Windows 7 like server, and then the person that's going to have to like be on that is someone that it's going to not exist eventually. So are there like a few, like, I know that the Debbie down direction, but this is serious stuff people have to consider. Are there like, if people check like these 3 specific boxes or something, it's like you really probably have to start going in a direction of a change. Like if they're just things that are very glaring, it's like if you have this and this and this, like you probably have to make a change now or yesterday. So is there anything like along those lines?
If you're running an unsupported version of software, and a great example is we run into a lot of clients who have been told by their vendor they need to upgrade, and the upgrade's going to cost like $20,000 or something like that. If you've been told that and you're still using your old version, chances are you really need to move to the other one, or you're going to be a prime target for security related. Right? If you've been told that your version of your operating system or your software is no longer supported, that's a problem. If a client were to sit down and ask, how do you protect my information? And if you don't know what you would say to them, that's an indicator of a problem as well. So those are some things that at least come to my mind. I don't know if that kind of answers your question.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's just, we know lawyers that are just kind of been in the same rhythm for, a decade. They know their IT people better than like their own kids. And it's like, because they've just been, it's like a legacy arrangement. And it's just like, at what point can this relationship is just, it's be beneficial to the law firm if it's like the same thing, like for years. At what point does it kind of change when everything else around them is changing?
Why do you think they keep things status quo? And is it just because it's easier to do that than to take on the extra work of having to learn something new and change? Or it's just they trust their guy, and if their guy doesn't tell them that they need to upgrade or do something different, they'll just keep doing what they're doing?
there's like a theme of complacency and fear of change in the industry, and that most people like listening at hopefully at this point they don't get offended. This is very much why they've been listening to this podcast for a while, because every single expert that we have on is talking about how they can take steps to changing something in their practice. So it's just another thing. It's just, that's the theme. That's like that's like the theme of this whole podcast is like where you have to change at some point.
Yeah, I think change is hard, and especially for people that are really busy. Right. And so if you don't have a tech savvy workforce who is pushing for it day to day because it brings more efficiency to their work, forget the security piece for a component, but just makes their lives easier and it enables them to serve clients better. And frankly, if you don't have clients that are demanding modern ways of communicating with you, right, then it's easy to stay where you are. But I think increasingly as the consumer base is used to more mobile first, digital first technologies and are also themselves becoming more security aware, you'll start to lose business if you're not able to demonstrate that you are at the cutting, or if not the cutting edge, at least you're modern in the way that your firm operates. And I'll give you a classic example. Last year when I went to go send my taxes to the accountant, they were like, all right, so email me your files. Like, well, I don't feel comfortable emailing you all of my financial statements and everything else. Can you give me a secure way to upload? And it took them 2 weeks before they were able to get me a secure file link. And then once I uploaded it, the person on the other end had trouble figuring out how to get it downloaded. I said, okay, this is probably not the accounting firm that I want to be working with anymore. So things like that, I think it starts to speak for itself.
Yeah, it sounds like this is definitely something that our listeners want to be proactive about versus reactive, because I'm sure the investment upfront to kind of cover your bases and the headache alone outweighs what could happen if there is a vulnerability. And it sounds like you just kind of open up a pitfall of horrible things that could happen to your data and your firm, and having to spend a lot of more money to get to restore that data to a point that it's safe.
Yeah, I think there's this misnomer that in order to be modern when it comes to security, you have to completely rip and replace everything in your practice, right? And that's not true. I think that unless you're on really old software, like we talked about before, and you're no longer going to be supported by your vendor because it's that old and they're not going to patch it for security holes anymore, you can be secure with a server room and physical equipment. You can be secure in the cloud with a SaaS provider, but you can also not be. So the more educated you are as a consumer on where things go wrong and what are the common causes of mistakes and sources of malware infections and things like that, I think the better you're in a position to guide whomever your IT person is to make sure that they're being very proactive in how they're planning for your data security. They're giving you a disaster recovery plan. They're giving you a data and business resiliency plan, and they're able to show you real metrics for how your security is improving quarter after quarter, month after month. And I think that's really where you want to be. It's an evolving landscape, and the threats are changing all the time. And as long as you have good people who have the right mindset around security, you're going to be able to keep pace as those things.
And Cathy, this is such valuable information for all of our listeners. For those listeners that want to dive a little bit deeper into what eSilo can do, what's the best way to reach out?
So the easiest thing is just connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me there. Also, if you're interested in having a short call about what you're doing today for security and any opportunities that we might have to help, you can always find me at meetcathy.com, meetcaphy.com, or at our website, eSilo.com.
Thanks for listening to the Legal Mastermind Podcast. If you're interested in working with Ryan and Chase, please email mastermind@marketmymarket.com. Make sure to join the free mastermind group for growing and managing your firm at lawfirmmastermind.com. Ryan Klein and Chase Williams are the managing partners at Market My Market, one of the top legal marketing companies in the United States.